This is a strange time with lots of pressures and stress. I can't make it all disappear, of course, but I can offer you a way to stay hopeful, grounded, and focused for the new year. It's called Productivity Tools 2021. Simple strategies to help you be calm, mindful, relaxed, and productive. Themes include a working at home self-assessment, startup and shutdown routines, 3 ways to use fasting for clarity, a method to replace bad habits, spring clean up your life tips, and so much more. During December and January only, we are offering a 2-for-1 special. Get the 2021 Focus Toolkit and all the 2020 organizational tools with their how-to recordings. For only $19.99, you can have 2 toolkits for the price of 1. How-to recordings to get organized, and invitations to 12 months of upcoming focus tutorials and recordings. But don't wait too long to decide. After January 31st, the price will go up to $27.99 and will only include the 2021 toolkit. So don't miss out on this great deal. Get in on your 2-for-1 productivity tools special right away before the deadline. Go to shiftworkplace.co/productivity tools. That's shiftworkplace.co/productivity tools. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast, where it is my honor to interview Victoria Pelletier, who is a corporate executive at IBM. She's the general manager of leading businesses and has about 1,200 people that she's responsible for. She's the vice president of North America Talent and Transformation and is the senior executive with over 2 decades of progressive experience in strategy operations, growth initiatives, and business and talent development. Victoria Pelletier is a visionary leader with a passion for innovation, creativity, and diversity and inclusion, and has won both the 2020 Mentor of the Year Award from Women in Communications and Technology and the 2019 HSBC Diversity and Inclusion in Innovation Award. Victoria serves as a board member for several organizations and has recently co-authored the book Unstoppable and was featured in the book Fearless Women. She's an in-demand public speaker and appears regularly on national TV. She was on CBC Weekend Business Panel and has been featured on CNN. She is an inspiring professional with impeccable credentials. Victoria is a trusted voice among peers and emerging executives. Welcome, Victoria.
Thanks, Marie. Really glad to be here.
So that was the formal bio, and I'm wondering if you could fill us in with a few personal details.
So I'm a wife. I'm a mother to 2 kids, 20-year-old son, 16-year-old daughter. I'm a fitness fanatic. And then from a corporate standpoint, I am a lifelong corporate executive. I had dreams of being a corporate lawyer, but worked in business while I was in university and ended up getting promoted and loving the life of leadership. I became an executive at just barely 24 as the COO and general manager for a large outsourcing services organization. And since then, I've continued on that trajectory of corporate executive in a business to business, technology, services, environment, and very much as a general manager. And then on the side, I've almost always had, the side hustle, either in building businesses of my own, my personal, passions, having bought a business at one point. And now I'm also pretty heavily involved, not only in some board work that I do, but in supporting female entrepreneurs through an organization called SheEO.
So my burning question so far is, age 24, how did you land that sweet gig?
So I actually started working at age 11, and I don't mean like babysitting like my daughter was doing at that age, working, in retail and progressed. And I graduated high school at 16, and so I was in university and I was working in a medical office and then moved into working for a bank in their contact center. Fairly flexible to work around, my school schedule. And I was a voracious learner. And so I took a number of courses, and working at a bank, the securities course and mutual funds license and all these different things. And then ended up being able to lead bigger and bigger and different types of work within the bank. And although I said earlier, the goal was to be a lawyer, I grew up in Western Canada and I had been relocated for a month on a temporary assignment in Toronto. And the bank recognized me and asked if I'd come permanently in like a senior management role, which I did. And I thought, oh gosh, I just graduated. I'm now 20 years old. I'll take a year off before I go to law school. I love Toronto. I'll stay. If not, I'll go back to Western Canada. And it turned out that during that year, I really loved the work that I was doing and got promoted to more senior levels. And as a result of having been leading so many different areas within the bank and the contact center environment, a recruiter came to me for an opportunity to be the COO and general manager for a third party call center organization doing externally for many other clients, including banking clients, what I had been doing inside. And so that was my opportunity, but it was a huge leap of faith and stretch and, being comfortable in a very uncomfortable place of unknowingness. And quite frankly, only 3 months after I'd given birth to my son.
Well, you're definitely a good fit for the Fearless Woman book. I'm glad that they interviewed you.
Thank you.
What I was thinking about that might have been an advantage that you latched onto early on was that you paid attention to finances, and very few women do that when they're young. And because of your financial acumen, the other things that you learned were also, I'm sure, necessary and important, but I think that financial acumen was significant. So walking into the room as a woman who can speak numbers, that qualifies you for a higher level position right from the get-go. It seems to me, did I get that right, or am I off track there?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I come from extremely meager beginnings. So the financial acumen came out of a fear of not wanting to ever get to a bad place. And so I learned quickly how to manage my own finances. And then, yes, with all the courses and everything I took within the bank, and I learned how to read, a P&L statement, very much helped as I went in and finally had accountability for one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, either people are motivated because they love the whole financial piece and they're really interested in what money can do for them, or they're motivated because they don't want to be poor. I'm thinking that either way, just making sure that you're solid with your numbers is great. And that's what everybody needs. In Canada, 97% of people are in such bad debt that they don't even have a month's worth of savings if things go wrong. And I'm sure it's similar in the United States. So good for you.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch to my next question, which is your childhood. You must have some incidents that stand out in your mind that you believe made you into that person that you are today, a fearless woman. Can you think of any?
Yeah, absolutely. Marie, I was born to a drug-addicted teenage mother who beat me severely. I went in and out of care a number of times before eventually being adopted by an amazing woman and her husband. And I say woman and husband because my mom is my adoptive mother. Julie is my biological mother. And my mom was the one who drove hard. I think my dad just came along, for the journey because she said they needed to do it. And so, those early years of fight or flight, of being never sure of what my biological mother was going to do, how she was going to respond, caused me to be on high alert. I chose from a very early age to be, a fighter. The last words while I was in Julie's care was to call the woman that later became my adoptive mother and said, come and get her before I kill her. So that made me who I am today for so many reasons. I had to go through this journey where I was highly insecure and often in fear of rejection. And so working through the emotions and understanding the root cause behind all of that. And there's been a number of other incidences from, childhood feeling like I sat on the outside, whether it's hitting the height I am, which is 5'8", which isn't crazy, but I hit it by age 11, right? So I stuck out like a sore thumb, to being the gifted student in class who got separated to do different, work, to being raped at 14. There's just all these things. And so it hardened me to some extent. My best friend calls me Turtle because I do have that tough exterior. I can shoulder a lot, but actually I'm highly emotional and sensitive inside. But every single one of those incidents taught me I was resilient. I can move beyond this. I'm going to control what I can control. And there's also an element of it where, certainly earlier on, I was determined to prove people wrong. I was better than the roots in which I came from. And I needed to deliver and do well and make others proud.
You're a portrait of resiliency.
Thank you.
When you look at people that go through really difficult times, they either succumb to the circumstances around them or they find something resilient within themselves, but there may be something externally that helped them maintain that resilience. Was there an external support somewhere for you? A teacher, a coach, maybe your adopted mother, something?
Yeah, my mom was it for me. I remember she was such a kind and caring, loving woman. And I remember at times, though, as a child, I hated certain elements of how she loved me. And that was by forcing me to talk and to understand. For a long time, I would push her or others away again out of fear, like, am I going to be rejected again? And so I'd come into these situations constantly, and she'd sit me down and she'd say, Tori was my nickname growing up. And she's like, Tori, like, I need you to talk to me about this. And she wouldn't let me go until I did. I had to sit across from her and have these conversations. She was my ardent supporter, even to like in school, recognizing that, I was gifted and, they asked to skip me a few grades. It was she who had to drive for me to be tested within school. So on every front, she was the person there for me, to rely upon and push me forward, even recognizing, you wouldn't know it now because I'm so extroverted, but I was very quiet. And it was my mom who even pushed me forward into the limelight to get me comfortable and out there by putting me in like modeling, classes that led to acting. And it was that actually helped break me out of my shell.
It's really helpful to have a champion. And I'm so glad that you got that champion. You think about how much talent children have, how capable they are, the genius in each person. Not everybody would have the amount of talents and capacity that you have, but everyone has something. And if every child had just one advocate like that, think how amazing our society would be.
Yeah, I joined the Children's Aid Foundation board, being a child from care, to understand it, to help give back to those who are currently in the system. Everyone needs that, as you said, that advocate or the champion.
Yeah. And good for you that you found also that inner strength within yourself to be able to say, I'm not going to be beaten by this. And no matter how much this scares me and how vulnerable I feel, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to show my true colors, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was very interesting. And I can certainly see that those incidents and the combination of extreme neglect and abuse together with the fierce advocacy for you and insisting that you stay in the room and address things and become resilient in ways other than just survival. You can certainly see how that shaped you. How about from the groups that you were born into? Because people are born into a region, they're born into a city or a town, There's so many groups around us that influence us. What would you say groups that you were born into influenced your sense of culture and self?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't feel that I ever had a strong ethnic identity. I could see on paper, I was born English, Irish, Scottish, and pretty clear when you see curly strawberry blonde hair and lots of freckles that that's quite true. But then, my dad from France and my mom an Anglophone in Montreal where they first met. So I didn't feel like I had that kind of cultural identity. We didn't participate in religious practices or anything like that. So for me, I actually tend to glom on to my friends and, their identities, culturally, religious, the celebratory pieces they had. And as my own, that's probably actually what has fueled a lot of my work around diversity and inclusion, and why the people I choose to hang around with and when I host a party are just so eclectic and different from all different places. That said, Marie, for all my parents did for me to take me in, they were lower middle class. My dad was a school janitor and my mom a secretary, although they always put me first. But there were no school trips because they couldn't afford it. My clothes came from what was then Kmart. And so that part of my community or the culture that I sat in is actually also a part of the reason why I've driven so hard as well.
People call that the working class or blue collar culture. I mean, it affects the way people think and feel and how they see the world. And it doesn't mean you're stuck there, but it is part of your influence, right?
My mom actually said to me at one point, she said, Tori, you just need to do better than us. Mm-hmm. And I was quite young. So again, that sort of drove it. The one thing I will say, so having been managing global and predominantly large North American, but also global teams over these past 20 years, and I've lived majority of my adulthood either between Toronto or New York, I'm a very proud Canadian. I was recently tagged on LinkedIn by someone in this Fantastic Four group, and the individual who tagged me as one of these Fantastic Four for the weeks, put hashtag American superhero. And I found myself, and I actually commented like, thanks for recognizing me, but I want you to know I'm a proud Canadian who lives in the US. So that's the one thing. It was, and one of the first, and actually cultural identity, it's interesting, although they're both removed now, because what I wanted at 20 in my 30s was not realistic. I got 2 tattoos, probably 2 weeks apart from one another. One, to my cultural identity per my birth certificate, I got a Celtic sun, and the other, a Canadian maple leaf.
Well, certainly your fierceness can come from the Scottish heritage as well. I mean, the Scots are fierce people and they're resilient. They can get through pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Well, from the groups you chose to belong to, what aspects of those cultures would you say you've adopted into your leadership style? I mean, corporate culture is the first thing that comes to mind for me, but there must be many more.
Yeah. So having come from the socioeconomic blue collar kind of culture that my parents were in, the work ethic that came from them is something that I very much brought to the corporate world. If you were to talk to my teams and ask them to describe me as a leader, they will tell you I'm tough, but I'm fair. I set a really high bar, but that I hold myself accountable to as well. And one of the hashtags I've taken quite liberally is, hashtag no excuses. My kids hate it. Actually, probably my employees hate it as well. But a lot of it comes from that cultural identity, number one. Two, actually, in terms of how I lead, having a really good understanding of both the Canadian and American culture, very particularly from, a working perspective, to bring that to the relationships I have and the understanding I have. And, as Canadians not wanting to be led by our American headquarters all the time because we're different in Canada, but also at the same time trying to get our Canadian colleagues to recognize that, the size and scale of the US is such that there's going to be some greater resources there and therefore some experience and we should be leveraging. So, I bring those elements and the fact I've spent a significant amount of time in Europe and in Asia and India particularly, and learning more about those cultures and just how to be sensitive. And then also the last bit around, being part of this marginalized group in two ways. One, in just that sort of outsider in terms of my early childhood beginnings. And the other was actually having come out as part of the LGBT community very early as well. The importance of bringing one's authentic whole self. I didn't really learn it until I was later in my 20s. I had to stare firmly in the mirror at myself as a leader when I got some feedback at one point. But all of those elements have informed who I am as not only a leader, but just as an individual, and a member of the community.
You told me earlier on that you were married first to a woman and then to a man, and you have 2 children who are in their teens. So what was that like for you as far as influencing your leadership style and the way you approach culture? Because you've been in both sides, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I met my ex-wife who sadly passed away a number of years ago at age 22 and she was 35. And I always knew I wanted to have children. Actually, the importance of having my own biological ties or connection was important to me. She'd had a daughter from a prior marriage and given her age and mine. So I actually gave birth to both of our 2 children through artificial insemination. And so it was, interesting to go through. Now, I was living in Toronto at that point, so way more accepting than Calgary was when I left, for sure. I know it's evolved significantly since then, but experiencing support, yes, but at the same time, it was relatively uncommon. I remember Melissa Etheridge had just come out at the time that David Crosby was the donor of her child, and a journalist had contacted me to get a quote and understand and hear my story. And so it was really interesting to, live that and see. I was very proud of who I was, and I brought my wife to corporate events to see the, complete shock and reaction. I look very feminine, so there was just an assumption that was made, number one. Number two is, I'll say in meeting my husband, but the fact is I came out as bisexual at age 14. Interestingly, in the LGBT community, generally the bisexuals sit at the bottom of the totem pole. And so you're sort of marginalized within the community for being bisexual and not gay or lesbian. And so kind of feeling those dynamics too, now being, married to a man but being very proudly out and telling my past story, and others who just are uncomfortable in asking questions or don't decide, or they don't understand kind of the fluidity and where people fall on the spectrum. So that from a work perspective, leadership perspective, again, it's about, understanding the whole person and the individual and what drives them, because that influences the decisions they make every day. And then also in these times we sit in now around systematic racism and Black Lives Matter, learning to listen a lot more. I did that previously, but now more than ever. And I think that's just been informed given sort of, the culture, the identity, and, the communities I've been a part of.
Right. So it would have predisposed you to be looking at both sides because you were living both sides.
Right.
And then, you can see yourself in different situations. You can also see other people in different situations. I'm thinking the combination of having been through difficulties and then really establishing who you were and then working through all of that and finding out different aspects of your identity and placing yourself and trying them out. All of that would make you into a leader that would be quite responsive and flexible. I'm just guessing because I haven't ever worked for you, but would that be the kind of thing people would have said about your leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. The no excuses mantra is one component of it, but I actually tell people look, things happen. And so manage our clients' expectations, manage my expectations, understanding we're all human. Yes, we have deliverables, at work, but understanding all that makes us up in 24 hours and what we need to get done. So I think my team would say I'm very flexible. I had an incident with, a gentleman who said he was worried about taking time off for his health, given some things that had impacted because we were at quarter end. And I said, first and foremost is your health and your family. Business goes on. So you need to do what's best for you. Yet I'm in a publicly traded company, right? Where quarter to quarter results matter. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about doing the right thing. And by my employees, by our clients, period.
Yeah. When you die, it'll be that you were a mensch.
Yeah. Yeah, I want my impact to be what is spoken about when I die. Not that I was able to deliver, X gross profit and revenue and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Who's going to say at your eulogy, was able to keep the numbers stable in every quarter for all the stakeholders? It's not going to matter. They're going to talk about how you impacted people and their lives and your lives intertwined. So, yeah. Let me ask you a little bit about your temperament and your personality. So temperament, what you're born with, and personality, which is very hard to separate because they aren't really totally separable. But your personality comes from you overcoming obstacles and choosing opportunities or not choosing them. So temperament, what would you say you're born with that's just really you?
So I don't believe in astrological signs, but I am a Taurus, and stereotypically adhere to some of those around being stubborn, but also fiercely loyal. So I definitely have had those from birth. I think both my biological mother and my mom, would have said that for sure. I am very A-type in terms of not only being very driven, highly organized, all of those things I think were innate. But what's interesting, you said, Marie, the things that would have influenced me. I am very much an extrovert. I am known for being a crazy networker and a connector of other people, but that you wouldn't have known as a child at all. People would have said I was shy or quiet, and I don't know that I was, but I would sit back and observe. And so I was what others said, shy and quiet, and I grew into my extroversion. Actually, that first executive role, I went from leading operations internally within a bank to all of a sudden running a business as a general manager where I had sales and marketing and really client-facing activities in front of me. And that meant I needed to network, right? People do business with people they like and they trust, they want to do business with. So it's not about responding solely to an RFP. There should be a relationship involved in there. And that for me was getting comfortable in my discomfort. networking conversations and small talk didn't come naturally to me. Now it's second nature. You wouldn't know at all. I can strike up a conversation with someone in an elevator, like strangers anywhere we go. My husband's the opposite, and sometimes I think he cringes a little bit around that. But that would be one I'd say I've grown into it. You could argue whether it's innate or not. When I look at my two children, my daughter is a mini version of me in terms of her extroversion and social skills.
Well, these things change as you get older too. It's rare that people stay exactly the same on the introversion extroversion scale from the time they're children all the way up to the time they're age 80. And so often your introversion extroversion is shaped by the requirements of your job and your environment. Mm-hmm. So you probably responded to it, learned the skills, and because you're a quick study, you went, you know what, I can do this. And you may find in another 10 years or so that you become more introspective and less interested in networking, and then that may change again. But yeah, just a little reflection on that. So can you recall a time when you became aware that your understanding of the world was, in fact, specific to your culture and not just normal? If you went to India, you must have experienced that.
Yeah, I was going to say I did for sure. So, coming from Canada in a culture, although we've got ways to go still in Canada, but from being an inclusive culture much more so. So it was so interesting to go from there to India. So I was, in my late 20s, as the most senior person, and we were building out new facilities there. And it was interesting to go there and, none of the contractors would talk to me. And it had to be one of my male employees who could have the conversation and talking and understanding more about the caste system and colleagues who were, being forced into arranged marriages. And I remember having grown up in Calgary, which is again more diverse now with an East Indian mayor now. But it was so white. There were not many, people of color in my high school that I went to. So for me to go from that one to Toronto to then spend this time in India, I was the tourist attraction too, by the way, everywhere I went, people taking photos. I just had this moment where it really did cause me to reflect more and quite frankly, a lot of appreciation for the culture I come from and that I can have a voice and I can be, a female executive, with great influence and recognizing, and that was going back close to 20 years now. And so things have certainly evolved, although not to the same extent. So that was very eye-opening for me, for sure, in terms of and learning that typically the Indian culture doesn't want to disappoint. So there'd be a lot of yes, yes, yes. And in business, that created a challenge for me because then there was an inability to deliver what they'd committed to. Again, I've seen a significant evolution in the 20 years since I've been spending time in India. But those were some pretty big eye-openers for me in terms of how I needed to lead, engage, and just recognize and understand their culture, learn from it. And to be successful, quite frankly, I needed to be okay and go along with a number of those things.
Yeah, because there are cultural expectations that if you disappoint, you just can't get past them. When I first went to India and people met me at the airport with wreaths of flowers, I was completely flabbergasted, especially after 48 hours with no sleep. And then 5 people to take my suitcase. And I'm used to, carrying my own suitcase as an independent Canadian woman. The complete shock and disbelief on their faces when they couldn't do that. And when I took the flower wreath off, I realized I'd really made a huge cultural mistake right from getting out of the gate.
Yeah.
It took a while to see what the problems were that I was causing. I wasn't intentionally doing them, but you just make so many faux pas, right? And then you go, oh man, if I would have known that, I could have handled this better.
Yeah, exactly. Now, each time I would go to a different country, I'd spend a lot more time understanding kind of their cultural norms, right? Over where do you shake hands? Is it a kiss on one cheek, 2 cheeks, 3 times? All of those sorts of things, just to, again, understand and be respectful of the differences in our cultures and again, the norms that they have.
There's always a really weird sense of privilege when you go as a white woman somewhere where you're the minority. Like you said, you're the tourist attraction. So in one way, you're people are so differential to you. It's just awful. You just don't want that to happen, but it's there. And on the other hand, you can have the opposite experience. I found if I tried to venture out on my own in the street, I was immediately accosted by men who thought I was a prostitute. So it was from being treated as a goddess to being treated as a prostitute. There was no way to be yourself. And it made me think that that's what the experience of racism is like. When people live racism, there's no way for them to be themselves because people refuse to see them outside of the stereotype.
Yeah.
That's typically not something white people think about.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I find right now it's much more like even at IBM, we've been having a significant number of these open dialogues post George Floyd's death in this Black Lives Matter moment, where a big part of it has just been our Black or brown colleagues talking about their lived experience, because we as Caucasians don't understand. It's not lived. So a big part of it has just been listening with the intent to understand. With many cases, no response necessary, but just to be there beside them and hear these stories.
To hold the space for someone.
Exactly.
Yeah. If we would have done that 300 years ago, we wouldn't have had all the devastation of colonialism, but we didn't know anything about listening. Okay, so we're just about at the end of the interview. I'm really honored that you are a part of the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast group of outstanding people. And if people are hiring you for your business, or if they're asking you to do something within the context of your role of leading other businesses, what would be some tips about what is a great way to work with you? How can you be at your best? How would you explain that?
So being my best means a number of things. So I mentioned earlier that I'd had a critical moment at one point where I needed to look at myself critically in the mirror in terms of getting some leadership feedback. And it was because I wore a bit of a mask, all business, all the time, like deliver, get stuff done. And so it was around being authentic and being our true selves. Long before Brene Brown became very popular, I was talking about the need to be vulnerable, right? To be comfortable saying, I don't know what I don't know, and be okay to ask for help. So that's a very big part of it. And the other is around connections. And, I felt I was alone for so long in, delivering, and it maybe a bit of that afraid to ask. I was comfortable maybe, in a few instances early on in my career, burning a bridge without understanding, one, how small the world is, but the importance of the relationships and how do we work through those things. So another key component is with intention, building a network, maintaining a network, great people around you from a variety of diverse experiences, backgrounds, like culture, lived experiences, to just help with what we were just talking about, understanding, to help I solve business challenges for clients. I can't do that without an amazing team and people around me, but also without great understanding of the challenge they face.
So it would be important for you to be surrounded by people who are different from you, have a different lived experience from you, and don't think the same way you do, so that you can get to the root of a problem and collaboratively come up with a solution.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, innovation actually comes, it's proven when you look at diverse and inclusive workforces, I mean, innovation comes out of, having that diversity of thought, right? The creativity that comes from it. So I absolutely, want people that don't look like me, don't have the same lived experience as me, to be able to, have that level of understanding and build that great innovation and problem solving.
I'm just tempted to ask you a little bit about how you work with the power differential. Like, I think you're very approachable, but if I was in an organization and there is a hierarchy there, when you surround yourself with people from diverse backgrounds, there's still quite a variety of what people will say and do when they have to relate to someone who is in a higher power status than they are. How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, so I personally have no qualms, fears about engaging with anyone and everyone within all levels of the organization, right? Like, so, going to grab a coffee and just striking up a conversation with someone, could turn out to be the assistant for someone else and maybe not as senior to me. I have no problem walking in and, to some of the top levels in our organization. On the other hand, I know the other way. A lot of people see me as being highly confident. They'll see me on stages and on, our company WebEx is talking. And I think they have this perception that I might be unapproachable. And I've heard many times when I then engaged one-on-one with them and they come up and talk to me and ask a question, or again, I just have a quick conversation. They're like, oh, I had no idea, like you're so friendly and approachable. And so there's just this, I think many people have that fear, and it's unfortunate because at the end of the day, like at the executive levels, we started, at the front line ourselves. And so the ability to continue to engage and so my advice to those, who live a little bit in the fear around the hierarchy and having those conversations is be really comfortable with being uncomfortable, and also like when people ask me for, coffee or mentor or pick my brain, like it's rare you're going to get me to say no. You don't ask, you don't get.
The squeaky wheel gets the grease.
That's right.
I'm happy to meet another person who believes in that.
Yeah.
People can always say no, but if you don't ask, you aren't going to know if they'll say yes or no.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you would like to say? It's something you'd like to promote? We'll put everything into the show notes, but here's your chance to get on your soapbox and pitch. So go for it.
Well, there's a reason why I was the leading author in this co-authored book, Unstoppable. And that very clearly is, you and your listeners, can hear, like, that's my philosophy and life mantra. And so I would encourage everyone to, regardless of the culture they were born into or they've experienced or adopted, for themselves, they can choose to go to whatever heights they want. By the way, I talk about my success being a result of three things: delivering, so performance, extremely well. The next is around, the boundaries, creating them and being as expansive as you want them to be, but also learning when to say no. And the last one is the prior point around building this amazing network of people around you. Stuff's going to happen. It's control what you can control, to move beyond, be resilient, would be those big elements, but also surround yourself with people that come from extremely different cultures and different lived experience, because it is incredibly enriching. If anyone wants to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or on my personal webpage, which is victoria-pelletier.com. And it's been such a pleasure to be here and share.
Yeah, it's been really great to hear from you. And I love your 3 points that you said you use as your philosophy for your talks. I'd make a great infographic. I'm sure you already have one. But yeah, those are super. And I think that must inspire and encourage a lot of people to pursue things no matter how difficult their circumstances are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Marie, thank you for the great work that you do here and sharing with others. And I'm really glad that you had me on.
Thank you. Victoria Pelletier had a difficult childhood, but she used those experiences to launch a successful career as a corporate executive and to become an advocate for children and care with the Children's Aid Foundation. Self-aware, articulate, and reflective, Victoria's narration of her life story is a crash course on how to take something difficult and make it into something beautiful. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Victoria Pelletier. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much. Hey, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Do you love these insightful and moving interviews published twice monthly for your listening pleasure? You may not know that it costs between $300 and $500 per month to pay for our podcast episodes. Shocking, but true. Well, now you can help support this podcast by showing your love with a little skin in the game real money on the Patreon website. For as little as $5 or as much as $50 a month, you can contribute to keep Culture and Leadership Connections alive and healthy. Your donation is invaluable in helping us connect the hearts and minds of people across cultures and professions for happier and more humane workplaces. I know you will call on your inner generosity, knowing that your contribution is a practical demonstration of love and support. Check out the patreon.com/culture and leadership connections page to see what subscription level feels right for you and find out about the special loyalty perks at each patron level. That's spelled Patreon, patreon.com/culture and leadership connections. Thank you for your generosity.